I tried to problematize the idea of merit from an embodied perspective, trying to move from the general discourses that are describing meritocratic policies in Latin America towards micro practices in which my body was involved, trying to depict my own story and connect my story with the specific historical discourses. I think that it's really important for a scholar in social sciences to position him or herself in order to produce a more meaningful knowledge in which we can feel identified at a certain level and understand where are we talking from, because sometimes this embodied perspective doesn't allow us to see the other who is producing discourse, and for me it's really important to be able to map the territory and understand who is speaking to me in order to understand more meaningfully.
In my presentation I compared initiatives in BC and in Quebec, policy initiatives aimed at increasing Aboriginal students' educational success. And I kind of trouble those ideas. And I, with this presentation, sort of present the ways in which colonization has been framed differently in Quebec, mainly around the colonization of the French by the British, which has sort of definitely erased the history of the colonization of Indigenous peoples on that land. And then I try to talk about ways to reimagine education so that it's more inclusive, and wonder if we should do this by incorporating Indigenous ways of understanding and being, or if that's problematic and rather we might need to focus on our own histories of having enacted colonization. I think that I definitely try to address a gap with my paper in terms of the literature in English about Canada often sort of creates a pan-Canadian reality that ignores geographic specificities. And in my case, I'm talking about unique contexts in Quebec. And so that's probably the most important thing that I hope people took from the presentation.
My presentation was an examination of Aboriginal Education Enhancement Agreement policy. This is public education policy. It's intended to improve educational outcomes for Aboriginal students, and so I critically analyzed these policies and interviewed students to find out from their perspective how they experienced the policies. And so I argue that there are repetitive effects of Aboriginal education from the colonial past. There are colonial effects, that there is a colonial archive that gets referenced whenever claims to the land, education for Indigenous children, social justice in terms of the effects of the Indian residential school system get talked about, and this colonial archive functions to confine us in an anachronistic space. That means out of time, out of place in the social fabric of Canada.
My presentation is about migrants and the mechanism that they are disempowered. And I look at this issue from two perspectives, from Bourdieu's socio-political perspective and also Said's geopolitical perspective, focusing on migrants from the Middle East. I hope this presentation gives a kind of alertness to people living in the North America that exposure to media and to the news can somehow help the process of disempowerment of the migrants, specifically those who are from the Middle East.
I looked at the education system of the third world countries, and my argument is that the agenda of development through education has not been successful as expected because there is a systemic fault in education. My intention was to give a sense that what is going on in the field of education in developing countries. And I hope I'm successful in delivering that there is something wrong in the system itself.
I was talking about school gardens and the history of school gardens. I called it Down the Garden Path Again, a critical history of school gardens. I'm really excited about school gardens and garden-based education, but at the same time I really worry if we don't understand the history of school gardens, what our contemporary practices will be in our understanding. So I think looking at the history is really important, and there are some really difficult moments in that history. So as a German Canadian, I looked at ones that related to my positionality. So I looked at residential schooling and how agricultural and garden-based education was really central in the assimilation of First Nations children. And I also looked at Germany during the time of the National Socialists, the Third Reich, which also looked really mobilized a blood and soil ideology connecting children to land through school gardening again. So I wonder about these instances of school gardening, and I think we should keep talking about those and keep integrating them into our material practices in gardens today.
My presentation is about schools of choice, looking specifically at a fine arts school. It's a case study on the population of students coming into the school from outside of the catchment area, particularly on the perceptions of parents and fine arts schools. I hope that others are learning the complexity of the public school system, particularly in light of the new agendas brought on by our current government in bringing private sector ventures into the public school system and how that has affected the neighborhood school.